rare and balanced view on politics in today's world. Based on facts, born of rationality, common sense, and logic, providing context on today's events. This is American Perspective with Rick Thomas.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to American Perspective with me as your host. Thank you all for joining. I have an announcement. I have passed 650 followers on Rumble. Thank you for those who were over on Battleground Live with Sean Parnell, who came over and grabbed or hit that green follow button, I should say, on Rumble. And that's great. I do appreciate it because 650 is that's a pretty big number. I mean, I'm shooting for more, always looking for more, but I do appreciate all of the 650 followers that have followed. I've been watching, and it's like the number creeps up to 648, 649, and then I would start losing people, probably because those would be the Rumble bots that were running around, and Rumble cleans up their bots quite frequently. And so, yeah, this is great. I thank you. Thank you very, very much. I do appreciate it. Also, a couple other things really quick before we get into the show. I don't know if anybody has noticed on the Rumble side, but there are special emojis for this channel only. Now, I only had 3 in there originally, but Judge Wild went and sent me a few. And so take a look. So how you do it is you go over to the on the side of the message, there's like this smiley face, and you click that, and it will pop up, and it should pop up the specific emojis for this channel. There's one in there that he created for Coco and for 3 Chevy. And let me see who else. Yeah, so there was Coco and 3 Chevy, and then Judge Wild, he got his own in there. There's also like a wooden cross, and then he's got a click and a bait. So clickbait. But anyway, you can go and take a look and see, because they should show up. Oh, Coco says they don't work on the phone app. I'm sorry. Well, I'm sorry. I thought they would. But anyway, so there's that. He also sent me a bunch of Biden clips, sound bites of various Biden gaffes, and eventually I'll get them worked into the show. I particularly like the one where he's like, "Come on, man!" But I'm working. I'm working on getting them into the program to where I have them on my soundboard, where I can light them off like my other stuff, such as this one here. Got to be able to set that up and do that. So anyway, all right, let's go ahead and kick off the show with, of course, the Pledge of Allegiance. Tonight's Pledge of Allegiance is being stated or said or recited, however you want to call it, by our very own Buddy Weiser over on Rumble. So please, if you are of mind, stand up and remove your hat, put your hand over your heart, however you want to do it, and recite with Buddy the Pledge of Allegiance.
I hereby pledge my allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which she stands, one nation under one God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all her citizens. So help me God.
And of course, I thank Buddy for submitting that to me for this. Do me a favor, if you want to get your pledge put on there, just record yourself with you can do it with your cell phone. I mean, most cell phones have like a memo notes app or something like that, recorded notes. You just do that and then figure out how to email it to me. It's usually not very hard. You can send it. They typically have options where you can send those notes to people. But email it to me at fans, FANS, at AmericanPerspective.online. That's fans, FANS, at AmericanPerspective.online. And you can get that to me, and I'll put you into the rotation so that you can see or, well, listen to yourself saying the Pledge of Allegiance. And I do appreciate all of my Whiskey Warrior P1s for doing that. For those of you that don't understand what P1 means, P1 is the designation of the first, the number one button to save a radio station. So this harkens from the old radio station days. A P1 listener would be one of those who put in the first memory, the first spot, the number one spot on their radio in their car. So they could recall the station over and over and over again. So that's where that comes from. When I call Whiskey Warrior P1s, man, you guys are the hardcore listeners, the people that are here, almost all the time. You interact with me, you hang out, you do stuff for the show and everything. And I do appreciate all of that. And it really isn't hard to become a P1 at all. All you have to do is show up and chat with us and let everybody know who you are. Say hi, enjoy with all of the conversations, whether it be on Facebook or YouTube or Rumble. Unfortunately, I don't know how to look over at Twitter and chat. I know I've got some Twitter folks that come and listen and watch. For an example, right now I have 5. According to my count here, I have 5 watching over on Twitter at the moment. So that is fantastic. Thank you very much for being here. I do appreciate it. Okay, so let's move on to the next thing, which is, let's go ahead and talk about the flag shirt. So I am wearing a fantastic colored American themed shirt. I wear them all the time for every single one of my shows, and I get them from a company called theflagshirt.com. Go to theflagshirt.com. Right now they have a special running. They've got a sale for Memorial Day. It's $15 off if you purchase $75 or more at the site. Believe me, you get 2, maybe 3 shirts out of them, or depending upon what you purchase. And trust me, you're going to hit that $75 mark. But if you only want to get 1 shirt at a time, you can also go and get a $5 off coupon by going to flagshirt.americanperspective.online. And you can get a promo code that you can enter in at checkout to get $5 off your order. So it's really your choice. Now, for Memorial Day, under $75, go to flagshirt.americanperspective.online to get your $5 off coupon. Or if it's over $75, you type in MEM, I think it's MEM11. They have it on the website. You'll be able to see it, but you type in that code and you'll get $15 off that off of your order there. So go to theflagshirt.com and get yourself patriotized. All right. So one of the things that has occurred is the House Judiciary Committee, and I think the House Oversight Committee, James Comer and Jim Jordan. Those guys have asked, or they asked the Justice Department back in February, I think it was the end of February 27th or so. They asked to get not only the transcripts, which they already have, of the Robert Hur, I think it's Robert Hur, the Robert Hur interview with Joe Biden about his classified documents, but they also asked for the audio tapes. And most people would think, well, you already have the transcripts. Why do you need the audio tapes? Well, there's a lot that can be lost when it comes to communications, either in terms of inflection, tone within the voice, pausing. There could be things that he may have mumbled that never got transcribed properly. There's a lot of things that could be on those audio tapes that never made it into the transcriptions. And so being able to have those audio tapes and walk through them, not only that, but there's also, if there's videotapes, there's also other things such as facial expressions, body language, all kinds of things that is considered nonverbal communication that could be picked up. So it's a wise move for Jordan and Comer to go and get those and to examine them and bring them in as part of their investigation into the president, because of the fact that the president could be and could stand, although I doubt this is going to happen, but could stand accused of doing things such as bribery, treason, high crimes, and misdemeanors, all which fall under the purview of the Congress to be able to impeach and potentially even remove the president. But Joe Biden has decided right before the resolution, the two House panels decide to draft a resolution to hold Merrick Garland in contempt because of the fact that he has not passed it out, that he hasn't responded to the subpoenas. Biden goes ahead and, or at least the Biden White House, because let's face it, Biden oatmeal brains probably doesn't even realize that he even talked to Robert Hur. But the Biden White House administration decides to invoke executive privilege over the tapes. Now, let's be honest. Executive privilege is, for the most part, a stall tactic. Now, why do I say it's a stall tactic? Well, because of the fact that the Constitution does not specifically state anything about executive privilege. In fact, the concept is sort of a distillation of the idea of the separation of powers. See, the Constitution doesn't actually specifically mention anything about being able to hide documents from Congress. It doesn't even discuss, it doesn't get into the finer details of whether or not the executive branch can hang on to certain documents and not hand them over to Congress when Congress is investigating for things like high crimes, misdemeanors, bribery, and treason. Generally speaking, though, executive privilege is more of a, shall we say, practice. In practice, they do things like having executive privilege. But even the courts have gone a different route at times when it comes to executive privilege. For an example, the whole Nixon case, which was considered the Watergate case, it was the United States versus Nixon. In that particular case, executive privilege was taken away so that Nixon's tapes that they were trying to hang on to were exposed, where he discussed the whole Watergate break-in. Because, of course, as you all know, Nixon was the very first person to actually tape people in the White House and to tape his conversations. Now, he was doing it in order to make sure that he could recall the conversations exactly. But, again, they decided that it was essentially necessary for the investigation that they were going to launch into Nixon in preparatory for his potential impeachment. Now, those that don't recall, Nixon resigned before he had the opportunity to get impeached. And that, of course, set up the whole idea of Gerald Ford being the first vice president to ever not be elected as president. But anyway, I digress a little bit in history. So as far as that's concerned, Biden has this possibility. Now, some people might be thinking, I seem to recall executive privilege and that terminology being used very recently. Well, that's true because of the fact that Trump tried to exert executive privilege over things like the January 6th tapes and the January 6th communications that he was having in the White House while he was being investigated by the January 6th committee in Congress. And he also tried to exert executive privilege back even while he was in office with regards to communications with AG Bill Barr and some of his other attorneys like Mark Meadows and things of that nature, some of his other administration. And those for a lot of those, executive privilege was actually yanked. So it's not as though executive privilege is a guarantee that this is going to be covered up and nobody is ever going to hear the tapes. They're not going to come out. In fact, the GOP is basically saying, well, you guys are invoking executive privilege to make sure that his comments and how he speaks on the tapes and how he answers the questions on the tapes are not brought into the public eye right before the election. The Democrats on the other side are saying, well, the only reason why you want them is because of the fact that you want to cut them up and disparage him in the public eye. Not as though his public appearances and falling down, going into Air Force One and on stage at a military graduation and his gaffes and getting lost on stage and all that other stuff isn't already doing that. I mean, I don't see any gain or loss either way. So what has to happen now is the Congress has to pass a resolution, which is something that they did with the Nixon tapes, and pass that resolution through the House that allows them to make the referral to the DOJ in order for the DOJ to and basically sue, essentially, the executive branch for those documents. And my understanding is that that has gone ahead. They have advanced, the House panel has advanced to a wider vote in the House the contempt resolution against A.G. Garland for not providing the subpoenaed documents. So if the House can, and I believe it's a simple majority vote, so if all of the Republicans can stand behind this resolution, there is a potential here that we could actually see Merrick Garland going into court and, or at least the Attorney General going into court and having to defend himself from the whole idea of the executive privilege and whether or not executive privilege is going to exist here. Now, what's interesting is in historical context, most of the time, if it is a civilian matter, usually the courts side with the side of the president, meaning that executive privilege is upheld. But if it is in the context of a potential criminal case, the courts have traditionally broken down executive privilege and have basically said, no, this is something that has to be looked at from that point of view. I would imagine, considering the situation that we're in here, is that if a friendly judge can be found as a part of this case, and that's a stretch in D.C. because that's where this is going to be brought, But if a friendly judge can be found, that we will eventually hear her interview tapes. But again, whether or not that actually happens between now and the elections, well, that's going to depend upon the speediness of the hearing and the potential trial and how much the White House fights and so on and so forth. Does it go all the way up to the Supreme Court? Because that has happened. I mean, it just happened here recently in terms of Trump. Trump exerted executive privilege and appealed it all the way to the Supreme Court, and they went ahead and said, yeah, you have to turn that stuff over. So this is just yet in another series of lawfare going to be a very long and drawn out process in order to get this. Now, for most of us who already know that Oatmeal Brains is as bad as what he is, that, we can just expect that the tapes are really not going to show us much of anything. They're really not going to tell us much of anything different than what we already know, which is essentially that Joe Biden, as VP and senator before, stole classified documents that he did not have the authority under the Constitution to declassify, and that he took those things and handed them over to his ghostwriter and God knows however many other people may have had access to this. So essentially, we already know that Joe Biden has done what they are accusing Trump of doing. That's the Democrat way. It's to accuse what you know they are already doing, or accuse your opponent of what you are doing. That's what I mean to say. All right. Now, moving into a little bit more of the Alvin Bragg trial. So this showed up in Blaze Media, but it was a interview or a panel that was on CNN. Now, the entire clip that they have here is about 6.5 minutes long. Not going to play it for you, but I am going to tell you that these group of attorneys, and believe it or not, they actually, CNN's panel, they favored Trump because a lot of these, they favored the fact that they got former Trump appointees and employees, let's say. But when they introduced them, they all had something to do with the Trump administration. And the thing about it is that all of these attorneys told CNN anchor Jake Tapper that Manhattan District Attorney's case is entering the territory of doom. Well, actually, it just means that he's losing. So, one of the things that they mention here is that one of the things that could potentially happen is the judge, if Marshawn is actually even remotely interested in the outcome, that the judge will potentially tell the jury that if a witness has a bias or some sort of skin in the game, to take that testimony with caution. And that was one of the lawyers. His name is Brennan. Let me see if I can see who. Yeah, they didn't. Bill Brennan, okay, said that pretty much the judge will tell the jury that. Now, I don't know if whether Marshawn is actually going to tell the jury that or not, but Brennan explained that the witness is supposed to say they robbed the bank, they drove the car, it was blue, it was raining out. Not, I want him in jail and I got a silly little T-shirt on. This Cohen is reprehensible. This is what he's saying. So attorney and CNN analyst Carrie Cordero explained that prosecutors actually have not sufficiently met the burden required to convict Trump. And she said that I was here with you when the indictment first came out, and I thought it was underwhelming at the time. As the trial continues, I still am not seeing the prosecutors get to the part where they actually have demonstrated that the former president had the intent to commit the underlying crime and to influence the election. Okay. She also continued and said, my big question is, when they finally wrap up with Michael Cohen, what is the defense going to do? Are they actually going to present a defense, or are they going to stand up and say, you know what, the prosecution hasn't met its burden? Now, the panel went through and they all kind of were polled by Jake Tapper and said, well, what do you think? Do you think that would be like a bold move? And he actually used the term baller, which for those of you who don't know, that term baller essentially means that it's like not necessarily a winning move, but a very bold strategy, a very strong thing to do. And the panel all agreed with it. And actually, Cordero even finished off with the idea that it's a strategy that the Trump defense should even consider. They should even consider not putting anybody on the stand. And she explained that by saying, I think at this point, there would be a strong argument for the defense to just stand up and say, look, the prosecution hasn't met its burden in this case. Here's all the things that they have to prove. They haven't gotten there, and it's time for everybody to go home. Attorney Michael Van der Veen also agreed the case was weak and was only getting worse. So, again, folks, I'm just going to say right now, like I've been saying for all of this was a, pardon the pun, but a trumped up charge in the beginning, and they have put on people as star witnesses who literally have problems with credibility. They have issues with bringing anything to the case. The case itself needs to just go away. And so, yeah, it's, again, don't be surprised. There is a possibility that come Monday, because they're off tomorrow, so they had, Cohen on the stand today, it's entirely possible that come Monday, they stand up in front of the judge and say, and the prosecution's already kind of rested at the moment. The defense might say, you know what? They haven't brought enough evidence for the burden of proof. They haven't crossed that threshold. Because remember, in criminal cases, the threshold is clearly beyond a reasonable doubt. And so if there is any potential of a reasonable doubt here, which there is plenty, that they need to just go ahead and they could move to close the case off just because of the fact that the burden of proof has not been met. And that would be actually kind of nice for them to do that, because that'll end this quickly. But whether or not they actually do that or not, I still think that they should, if they're going to mount any kind of a defense witness number one should be that Michael Cohen attorney who testified in front of Congress that I played the video of, I think it was yesterday. So they should go ahead and do that anyway. All right. So over the course of the last several episodes, I have been hounding on this idea that non-citizens actually do vote in our elections. And it seems kind of fortuitous that every single day I run across new evidence, new studies, new conversations that demonstrate this in stellar fashion. Well, this is a new study that came out. This is through Science Direct. The link is in the description below. And just to give you a really quick synopsis of this thing, and there's really nothing to look at. It's just a bunch of words. But the question was put out in this study as to whether or not non-citizens vote in U.S. elections. And here's basically what they found in a short bulleted list of 5 items. Item number 1 is this is the first use, according to them, the first use of a representative sample to measure non-citizen voting in the U.S. Some non-citizens cast votes in U.S. elections despite legal bans. And when they do, non-citizens favor Democrat candidates over Republican candidates. Now, keep that one in mind. That is the key point here. Now, here is something else that they found. And this should actually scare the bejesus out of any American. Non-citizen voting likely changed the 2008 outcomes in the Electoral College votes and the composition of Congress. Let me read that again. According to this study, one of the key points and highlights that they brought out is that non-citizen voting likely changed 2008 outcomes, including Electoral College votes and the composition of Congress. Now, here's another one that's a little surprising that they discussed in this study, and that is that voter photo identification rules have limited effect on non-citizen participation. Now, that one is really key because, as I've pointed out multiple times across several episodes now in chasing down this topic, driver's licenses, which is the de facto photo ID that is used by just about everybody and everything, are just handed out to non-citizens without a problem. And this is my one key argument as to why we need to use the United States passport as the only ID verification that is approved for voting in U.S. elections. That's exactly why. Because I don't feel, me personally, I mean, yes, voter ID can tend to limit someone in terms of election fraud being able to, fill out a ballot in somebody else's name. But to actually cut back the ballot process and to keep non-citizens from voting, you have to find a way to have an ID that is specifically designed for citizens. United States passport is the only accepted identification that does that. Well, I'm not the only one that's pressing on this, and obviously these studies people are starting to take notice on this too. So there's a couple of people who are looking at this. One of them is Peter Schweitzer and his co-host on a recent episode of The Drill Down, which I'm thinking is like a podcast. Eric Eggers was a co-host on The Drill Down. Eric Eggers also wrote the book in 2018 titled Fraud, where he examined the history and various ways that election fraud has occurred in U.S. elections historically. But they called out that study that I just gave you. And that was based on surveys done for the Cooperative Congressional Election Studies. And they showed evidence that non-citizens are voting in our elections in what is considered meaningful numbers, which is why they were saying that the 2008 elections were modified by these folks. This study, and they call this out, shows that as much as 27% of non-citizens were registered to vote, and as many as 13% of those 27% that were registered actually cast ballots. So it was this study, apparently, the study I just cited, that apparently put House Speaker Mike Johnson on the path to introducing legislation requiring proof of citizenship before registering to vote. Now, keep in mind, remember, the Motor Voter Law of 1993 doesn't require the states to verify citizenship. It only requires them to ask the question and basically say, do you certify under penalty of perjury that you are a U.S. citizen, and provide a little checkbox on the form. Okay. Now, Peter Schweitzer and Eggers noted that the influx of illegal immigrants that have happened under the Biden administration, roughly 16 million that we know in estimation since Biden took office, means that the potential pool of illegal voters rises to between 1 million and 2.7 million potential ballots. Okay, so keep in mind, they extrapolated the idea that almost 30% of non-citizens registered to vote, and roughly half of those actually voted. Okay. Now, of course, they called out the problem that in many states, proof of citizenship is not required. As I pointed out, here in the state of Washington, they don't even ask. They just basically say, read that little checkbox, and if you like it, just take that check. There you go. But anyway, this bill that, of course, we already know is potentially dead on arrival, would require proof to be shown at the time of registration. Now, keep in mind, I'm calling out the passport, and as far as I'm concerned, the U.S. passport should actually be something that our federal government pays for. We shouldn't have to pay the additional money to get the U.S. passport. It should be an automatic. You are a U.S. citizen. Here you go. There's your passport. You know, go and take the photographs. I mean, hell, even now you can do it. My wife and family got their U.S. passports. They didn't have to go anywhere. They just applied online, sent in the money and the form and the picture. The picture they got at, the local store. There's plenty of places that do them. And they just sent it in and they got their passports back. They didn't even have to go into an office. Most of the time, if you don't have to expedite it, you don't need to go in the office. Now, when I got mine the first time, I had to have it expedited. But anyway, so Eggers' book included a study done of the voter rolls of 32 out of the 50 states, for which an example shown through cross-referencing that more than 4,000 votes were cast by voters in 2 different states in the same election. So, election integrity and this whole thing, honestly, is a big, big deal. And we really need to start tightening this stuff up. Now, Buddy Weiser points out that he doesn't need a passport because his North Carolina driver's license requires proof of citizenship. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. I mean, I'm okay with that. If you want to go down that path, if the states want to go down that path, sure. And that's actually part of the whole Real ID situation. So for those of you that don't know, the Real ID Act was designed originally, I think, to ensure that the driver's licenses across the 50 states actually met with certain requirements for verification. In other words, trying to keep them from being falsified, okay, and counterfeited. And some of the states, in fact, the majority of the states, have went ahead and implemented a lot of those, all of those kinds of, special features. They went ahead and implemented them. But a couple of states, mine included, yes, Washington, didn't bother to include them on the regular ID, the regular driver's license. And so here in the state of Washington, by the way, in order to get a real ID. They call it an enhanced driver's license. And yes, at that particular moment, you do need to provide, if you're going to go in and get the driver's license, you do have to provide proof of citizenship, i.e. a birth certificate. Now for me, because I already had my passport, that just made it easy. I just showed them my passport and everything was cool, which is part of the reason why I kind of focus on the passport. But if we want to go ahead and make it differently, it's fine. However it works out, I just think that this whole idea of being able to register to vote without proof of citizenship is a big scam, and definitely in favor of the Democrats, because as has already been noticed multiple times, Democrats benefit from illegals voting in our elections. And without having, and especially now with many of these states doing mail-in voting, there's no way to verify whether or not that individual who is voting, who would match up to a registration, is an actual U.S. citizen or not, because as of right now, there's no main central database that all states cross-reference. I talked to you about Virginia doing their thing, which they're doing a wonderful job of it. And Ohio seems to be waking up and cleaning up their voter rolls too, to make sure that that stuff doesn't happen. But until we tighten up on some of those things, there's always going to be a question as to whether or not our elections are actually fair, because all it takes is for a small amount of individuals to be able, especially as close as some of the last elections have been, all it takes is for a small amount of individuals in any one given individual state to be able to sway and change the potential outcome. Especially because we always are focused on certain states, such as Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Nevada, Arizona, as the quote-unquote swing states. And speaking of Nevada, 2020 was the biggest. 2020 was definitely secure, the most secure elections ever, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, this came out. Now, granted, this is for 2022, but still, in Nevada's biggest county, this is from the Federalist, in Nevada's biggest county, nearly 40,000 ballots were counted despite arriving after Election Day on 2022. So the Trump campaign and the GOP are now suing to stop Nevada's forgiving law allowing mail ballots to be counted up to 4 days after Election Day. So here's another thing that we can do to shore up our elections is basically say, hey, anything that's accepted after 12:01 or midnight, 11:59 p.m. on Election Day, anything that's received after that is automatically null and void. So apparently, Nevada's law allows for mail ballots to be received up to 4 days after Election Day to be counted, is now facing a legal challenge, and this is just going to bolster it because a fresh look at Nevada's 2022 vote count reveals the potential election flipping number of mail ballots that were counted despite arriving after Election Day. In just Clark County alone, nearly 40,000 mail ballots were counted that arrived in the days after voting supposedly ended, which was roughly 5% of the total county's total ballot count. In that same election, and here's partially why, in that same election, Republican Senate candidate Adam Laxalt led Democrat incumbent Senator Catherine Cortez Masto on election night, but eventually lost by less than 8,000 votes statewide. For comparison, 2 years prior, Joe Biden narrowly beat Donald Trump in the 2020 presidential election in Nevada by 33 33,596 votes. So both of those numbers were less than the 40,000 that were counted after Election Day in one county. Yeah. This is not good. We need to clean this up. We definitely need to clean this up. This is, and even they're talking further down in this that Laxalt was actually ahead at the night of election, and even some leftist organizations were saying this was a problem. And then all of a sudden, they started getting closer and closer and closer. So anyway, yeah, this is a problem. This is just again, another piece where we have to be aware of what's happening with all of us in terms of elections. And we're coming up to 2024. It's getting a little late to make these changes, but these are some of the things that we need to focus on, and we need to try and get our newly elected leaders, when they come in, to do it. And yes, you are correct, buddy. Constitution does say election day, not week. So this could be a potential constitutional issue if anybody really wants to bring that up, that it would be a constitutional problem. And the Democrats are really good with lawfare. In fact, here's a breaking news headline. Mark Elias has been going around the country and bragging on X about his election lawfare and stuff. Well, apparently this is just breaking news right now that an Obama appointed judge smacks down Mark Elias's absurd election lawfare. Let's read what this is all about. The firm of the Democrats' favorite lawfare artist, who was also the attorney behind the Russian collusion hoax, was all but laughed out of court in a recent Wisconsin election integrity case. The D.C.-based Elias Law Group, founded by former Clinton campaign and Democrat National Committee lawyer Mark Elias, brought a novel absentee ballot complaint against the state that an Obama-appointed judge called head-scratching. In dismissing the lawsuit against the Wisconsin Elections Commission, U.S. District Court Chief Judge James D. Peterson summarily rejected the leftist law group's outlandish claim that a state law requiring a U.S. citizen witness and sign an absentee voter ballot is a violation of voting and civil rights. See, what this guy has been doing is he's been going around and doing law or legal cases, and he's been challenging all of the Republicans' attempts to do things like voter verification, U.S. citizens verification, so on and so forth. And this is what he's been going around and doing. Now, I will admit, in some cases, he's actually been able to win, or his law group has actually been able to win. And of course, every time he does that, he stands up on X and freaking pounds his chest like he's won the Olympics or something. But unfortunately, in this particular case, he actually got shot down, which I'm celebrating that. But anyway. Okay. So speaking of illegals and illegals voting in elections, let's take a closer look at what's happening down at the border, because we've got a couple of things that are, in my mind, a little bit of a surprise and not so much of a surprise. Both. First, let's go with the not so much of a surprise. This, according to Hot Air, border crossings are actually up nationwide, but they aren't in Texas. Gee, I wonder why. Could it be that maybe Texas is actually enforcing its own border? So the number of illegal border crossings is down in Texas, but the bad news is that illegal border crossings are up in other states. The first 3 months of 2024, according to this Hot Air article, illegal border crossings are up 10% along the U.S.-Mexico border. However, the shift in where the illegal immigrants are crossing is moved primarily from crossing into Texas rather than, or they're not crossing into Texas anymore. They're crossing rather in Arizona and California. Gee, I wonder why. Arizona and California, both Democrat states. Yeah, Democrat-run states. Both of them have Democrat governors. In the 5 Texas sections of the border, U.S. Customs and Border Patrol or Border Protection data shows the total of number of illegal crossings for the first 3 months of 2024 are down 37% from 2023 and are down 51% from 2022. That's in Texas. Yeah, it's due to the actions that Governor Abbott has been doing. I'm not even going to play with you. It's not Biden. It's not his action. It's not what he did. It's straight up what Governor Abbott's been doing. And so congratulations to Governor Abbott and the Texas National Guard, realistically, in helping these things, helping this thing out. So yeah, that's the good news. Now, apparently, according to the piece, Mexico is also now working to control its southern border, and it's ramping up its efforts to stop migrants from traveling through the country on the way to the United States. Yeah, so, okay, it looks like things are coming around. It could be that they're coming around because everybody kind of knows that there's a possibility that Biden is no longer going to be president in November. Potentially. Yeah. Okay, so that's the good news. Texas is doing what it needs to do, and shit's going well. Here's bad news. And this, honestly, should scare crap out of just about everybody, to be honest with you. I know it kind of scares me a little bit. According to the Federalist, more Chinese nationals illegally entered the U.S. in 2 days. That's right. I said 2 days this month than in the entirety of Chinese nationals entering in 2021. Yeah, this is not, this is a bit of a problem here. So the implications of this, obviously, are not just limited to espionage, but extend to the potential for creating societal disruptions and furthering the CCP's global influence campaign in America. All right. So here's the thing. We've had a Chinese spy balloon. We've had China threatening Taiwan. We've had the Chinese coming across the border in record numbers. And these are not families, by the way, folks. These are military-aged men. I've talked about it on this program. Everybody has seen it. We've all discussed it. It is military-aged men that are coming across the border. Okay? President Biden doesn't seem to care. And the number of Chinese that are coming across in this is, at the closer we get to the elections, this is not only a significant breach of national security, but it also makes you wonder, is the Chinese Communist Party possibly ramping up for something? Now, you'll remember I made a prediction on this program, and I'm still sticking with it, that China does not want Trump in, and the closer that we get to the November elections, the worse that Biden looks like he is doing in the polls and in Americans' eyes, the worse that he looks like, the more likely that it looks like he's going to lose in November. The Chinese and the Communist Party might just say, you know what? We got to go now. And they may take out and attack Taiwan. Now, for those that haven't been listening to this broadcast, I can tell you right now there's a big reason why we don't want that to happen. The biggest reason, of course, being that over 90% of all of the electronics that are in the world, have a silicon chip that comes from Taiwan in them. China wants that technology. Taiwan services most of America's military defense capabilities with those chips, as well as consumer products. So this is not only a consumer products problem that we would have, where we would potentially lose the chip making, but we also could potentially lose our capabilities in our ability to defend ourselves with products and bombs and missiles and things like that that use these silicon chips for their targeting systems and such. And this is why this is such a big problem. And the Biden administration is basically just kind of ignoring it. And I've talked about on this program how often the Chinese have been testing the Taiwan borders, the Taiwan air patrols, the Taiwanese responses to their mock-ups of doing invasions on Taiwan. China wants to be the leading chip manufacturing in the world. That's what they're looking for. I've told you about them locking up the resources, the raw materials, how they've been pushing to take over more and more of the chip market. They're even doing things like coming and taking a look at our military installations and such. They've tried it with the balloon. They are looking to challenge the U.S. soon. And my belief is the worse that Biden looks, the more likely a Trump win is going to happen, the more you're going to see stuff like this ramp up. And even with, even on Battleground Live today, Sean had a guest on who basically discussed most of this and saying that there are the Chinese hackers. This isn't going to be just an all out, all of a sudden the Chinese show up on the West Coast and, we have a conventional war. No, this is going to start in the ethosphere, in the networks, they're going to be hacking. They're going to be trying to take over all of this, all of our infrastructure and everything else. That's what they're going to be looking to do. This is going to be a cyber war first, and then it will move into something like conventional warfare, more than likely. The cyber war potentially has already started. We're already seeing things like the ships colliding, although there's no, I haven't seen anything 100% to prove this. However, that was, again, this is something that Sean Parnell's guest was talking about. But we are going to see a ramp up of cyber attacks more than likely, and things are going to start to get ugly with reference to things like Taiwan. They are already starting to move into the Philippines. They're starting to do all kinds of things that are clearly an indication that they are looking to go into total world domination soon. And of course, a lot of this has to deal with the fact that their economy is failing. And I've talked about this on the program, albeit it was a long time ago, but they've put a lot of money into real estate, and the real estate isn't selling over there. They have a real money problem. They have a serious economic issues, and the only way to resolve that, probably in their minds, is to take over somebody else. Taiwan's a close neighbor and has a shit ton of strategic value. They also believe that Taiwan has never been independent from China. So to them, it's just taking back what they already own. Now, the problem that we have, as Buddy points out, if Taiwan can make the chips, the U.S. can make them too. The problem that we have with that, Buddy, though, is the fact that, number one, China owns at least 60% of the raw materials market because we allowed them to have it. We never bothered to go after it. And also, the fact is that, for an example, that wonderful chip-making manufacturer plant in Arizona that everybody's been talking about, that Biden's been touting, oh, this is going to be awesome. The chips that are being made by that facility have to go over to Taiwan for finishing before they can actually come back to the U.S. to be used. So we're only creating them to be like 3/4 to maybe almost finished, but not completely finished. It's not like they're going to be able to roll off the line and go directly into other manufacturing. They've got it. The Taiwan chip company said that from the beginning, that this manufacturing plant is not going to have finishing chips. And we don't have a lot of the raw materials at this point. At least we haven't developed a lot of the raw materials to be able to start building our own chips. Now, is it possible that we can do it? Absolutely, we can. I have no doubt that we can, but I think it's going to be a bit of a long road before we get to the point where we can actually make those chips and get them produced here efficiently and under budget. It's going to be a little bit of while. We're behind the power curve right now. We're behind the power curve. And I think if nothing changes in the next couple of years, we're going to still be behind the power curve with them. All right. That brings us to the end of the program. Thank you very much for watching. If you are not already on Rumble, I highly encourage you to head on over to rumble.com, find yourself and get yourself an account, and then find the American Perspective channel. Make sure you hit that green follow button so you'll know when I go live for my next show, which is tomorrow night, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern time, right here on this channel. And for the other, and of course, all of my other outlets as well. If you are part of Rumble and you are signed in, please make sure you hit that thumbs up button, as well as make a comment or two on the video if you have a mind, because all of that can go to getting this show more attention on Rumble. I do appreciate all of you. Make sure you're safe if you're in areas where there are storms. Other than that, we will see you tomorrow night. Have a great rest of the evening. Good night, everybody.
The previous broadcast was produced and is owned by Active Eye Media LLC. All rights reserved.